The next thing he knew, he was in a house, somebody else's house. There was a camera crew and a microphone boom and a young couple and a man in trendy clothing we thought he recognised from the television. And the man in trendy clothing was saying, "If you open up this kitchen space, the light from the garden will flood through the house." The kind of thing that really appeals to a professional couple. This wasn't what Terence expected from a close encounter of the third kind. He expected green men, he expected pulsing turbines that looked suspiciously like lava lamps. He expected, well, he expected the unexpected. Instead, he had been deposited into a property programme in a 3-bedded semi that needed minor updating. The camera crew shuffled past him up the stairs and he was left staring at an empty fire grate. He went into the garden and there was another camera crew and that Alan what's-his-name and that woman that never wore a bra, and they seemed to be planting a flower bed, and Alan was explaining something about some daffodil bulbs, and Terence went and stood between Alan and his daffodil bulbs and the camera, but they kept on filming, and Terence thought, "I must be invisible," and he stared back into the camera. And through the lens he saw himself, not his own reflection, but another self, in his armchair, in his own house in Shirley Heath, one hand on the remote, watching the television. And this Terence looked pale and gaunt, as if the cathode ray screen was playing out the last flickers of energy onto his face, before he tumbled into death and was gone. Terence in the garden fell onto his knees and turned away from the camera. He started pressing the daffodil bulbs deep into the soil. And then 2 hands and 2 arms emerged out of the earth. "We are ready for you!" And they grabbed Terence and they pulled him down into the ground until his whole body was consumed by soil and darkness. The next thing Terence knew, he was sitting in his blue Vauxhall Astra on the A42 between Cheswick Green and Shirley Heath, sirens sounding, cars going past, covered in manure, with a daffodil bulb grasped tightly in each hand. The windscreen was smashed and the wind swept a cold rain into his face. But he loved the sensation of it and the taste of the chill water in his mouth. He dropped the daffodil bulbs, held onto the steering wheel, pulled the car away from the curb and drove home. The windscreen wipers kept moving, even without the glass to clean, uselessly sweeping against the onslaught of weather. Wee, ah, wee, ah, wee, ah. When he got home, he pecked Madeline wetly on the cheek, made a cup of tea and watched the television. And as he sat there in his damp clothes, he discovered that no time had passed at all. No time between him being hauled into the world of television and then reinserted into his blue Vauxhall Astra with a squeaky wiper. It was as if the whole thing had never happened. Madeline went up to bed and later he followed her. He kissed the edge of her pillow and he slept soundly the night through. The next day he didn't go to work but drove his blue Vauxhall Astra to the railway station. He took the first train to London and booked into a B&B. At first, Madeline wasn't too bothered when Terence didn't arrive home that evening. He'd been late before, stuck in traffic, broken down, run out of petrol, the incidentals to the commuter flow. But by 10 o'clock, she was worried. The house was empty and the television was silent. So she rang the police, but they seemed uninterested in a missing middle-aged man from Shirley Heath. So Madeline went to bed alone, and Terence didn't come back the next day, or the next. On the third day, Madeline hesitantly approached the armchair. It had always been Terence's space, and she felt awkward around it, as if she were trespassing. She sat down on the cushions, lopsided in the cavity created by years of Terence's backside. She felt over to the remote control and switched on the television and didn't go back to bed. She stayed there for 2 hours, watching people decorate new homes, cook their exotic foods, relocate to sun traps overseas, dance beneath the glare of spotlights and their shimmering pop rivalries. Madeline wondered if this was where Terence was, in the land of television, the people doing other things, having other adventures. After 3 days of staying in the B&B in London, Terence walked to Hyde Park and joined the protest march he had heard about on the news. What they were protesting about he wasn't sure. Someone gave him a placard. He lifted it in the air and they began to walk. They went to Kensington Road and then the High Street and then down Kensington Church Street, the A4204 to Notting Hill Gate, on to Holland Park Avenue, the A402 and on into Shepherd's Bush and the Uxbridge Road. On and on they walked into the heart of the city. And what Terence noticed was that they were walking down these roads without any cars. And he was surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of people, some shouting, some blowing whistles. It was a chaotic mass of humanity roaring into the cold winter air. Terence lifted up his placard and shouted as loud as he could. A man with a video camera on his shoulder came straight up to him. Terence couldn't see the man's face, only the wide lens of the camera as it zoomed in on him. Back in Shirley Heath, Madeline was sitting alone in the living room in Terence's armchair, staring at the television. She gazed without looking, lost in her solitude. And then something remarkable happened. She saw Terence's face come by on the television screen, and he was surrounded by hundreds of people marching down the street, and then the screen zoomed in on Terence's face. And he dropped the placard he was holding. And he lifted up his fists, and he brought his fists together. "We are ready for you." And then his hands reached through the television screen into the living room, and grabbing Madeline by a waist, pulled her towards the television until her cheek was pressed against it, pressed against the speakers on the side, and finally she was sucked into the broken TV set itself and out into the London street and hundreds of marchers. He held his shocked and grazed wife, both of them surrounded near by these hundreds of people, and he put his hands through the hair that she would never let him touch, and then he pulled her towards him, so close that no one else could see. No one. Okay, there you go. That's what we are. That goes, that social data.